This is Masechah Sanhedrin, daf Chafhei Amud Aleph, on the bottom of the daf, where the Gemara begins Mafrichei Yonim, which is a quote from the Mishnah. Mafrichei Yonim is one of the four cases of the Mishnah where the person who does this is invalid, is pasul for being a judge or a witness. The Gemara begins by asking, "My Mafrichei Yonim, what are Mafrichei Yonim?" Hacha Targuma, here they translate it as Itakadme Yonech Lion. If your pigeon will come before my pigeon. Meaning, as Rashi says, if your pigeon comes first, I will pay you. And if my pigeon comes first, you will pay me. In other words, pigeon racing, betting on pigeons. Rav Chama bar Oshia Amar Ara. Rav Chama bar Oshia says that it's an Ara. Ara, someone who could decoy pigeons from their place to your coat so that it's kind of like stealing other people's pigeons. So we have two views what Mafrichei Yonim is. Man da'amar itakadme yonech lion, the one who says that it's pigeon racing, my time alo amar ara. Why didn't he interpret it to mean ara? Amar l'cha, he would say ara mipnei darke shalom ba'alma. Ara is a societal need to not allow people to decoy pigeons, but it's not really stealing. Because the pigeons that you're stealing are really not pigeons that were owned by the other person, but rather they're really ownerless, but they were sort of in the expectation that the other people would have gotten it. So, in other words, because of Darkei Shalom, for peace in society, we don't allow it, but it's not actually stealing. Uman da'amar ara, my time ala amar itakadme yonech lion. And the one who said it's an ara, what was his problem with interpreting it as pigeon racing? Amar l'cha hayna mesachik b'kuvya. He would say that that's the same thing as mesachik b'kuvya. We already had gambling in the Mishnah. The ara, if ara is pigeon racing, betting on pigeon racing, it's essentially the same thing as mesachik b'kuvya, and the Mishnah would therefore be redundant. Therefore, he interprets it to mean ara. V'idach, and what does the other one say? Who said that it's racing, betting? How is it different than mesachik b'kuvya, gambling? Tana tola b'das atzmo, v'tana tola b'das yono. The Mishnah had to teach us that a gambler is invalid in there's two categories of gambling. One is tola b'das atzmo, where you're betting on something that you're going to do, and the other is when you bet on something that your pigeon will do, or something that some external force will do. Utsricha, and they're both necessary to be taught. There's two categories of gambling, and they both need to be said. D'itana tola b'das atzmo, because if the Mishnah would have only had the case of betting on your own abilities, like mesachik b'kuvya, where you're rolling the dice, hasam hu delo gamar makne. Then, if that was the only case in the Mishnah, I would have thought that that's the only case of gambling which invalidates, because he didn't have intent for a kinyan, and it's a smachta. Da'amar, and the reason is because da'amar, because the person would say kimli b'nafshai, I am certain in myself di'ad'ana tvei, that I'm good at it. Aval tola b'das yono. But when you're betting on something that your pigeon's going to do, but when you're betting on something that your pigeon is going to do, aim low, I would say there's no delusion, and therefore there is a valid kinyan, a valid contract, and it's not a problem. It's not a smachta. It's not something that will invalidate as a witness or a judge. V'itana tolu das yono. If I only had the case of betting on the pigeon, da'amar, we can say, the person would say, b'nekashya talya milta, that the reason why it's an asmachta, the reason why it's not a valid contract is because the person deludes himself into thinking that the way that he claps himself will cause his pigeon to go faster. And I'm better at it than anyone else. And therefore he's delusional, and therefore it's an invalid contract. But in the case when you're betting on something that you yourself are going to do, Ema Lo, I would say that it's not an asmachta. Tzricha, therefore, both cases are necessary to be taught. That in both cases, the Mesachik V'Kuvya and the Mafrichei Yonim of 25a 25b are both necessary. The other view of our Gemara would say that they're both the same thing, essentially. They're both invalid, but from one source of Mesachik V'Kuvya, and the second case of the Mishnah of Mafrichei Yonim is referring to Ara, someone who violates Darkei Shalom, which is really considered to be an extension of stealing, and therefore invalidates the person.